Welcome to a new PYA webinar on Social Security and Insurance for Crew. Before we get started, a little introduction. My name is Kim Llorente, and I'm representing the Professional Yachting Association, or PYA. We have been around for over 30 years and have members from over 90 countries. Among our services, we have the Members Assistance Service, where Yacht Crew can contact us for anything related to their employment on board, including contracts and related issues. Every year, we receive dozens of questions from crew asking clarification on Social Security, who needs to pay what and how. This is why we organized this webinar together with our knowledgeable speakers who know everything related to Social Security, including crew insurance, which we will learn is also very important. And I will let the speakers introduce themselves now. John?
Yeah, my name is John Cook. I'm the founder and managing director of Lesia Employment Services, ICC Limited in Guernsey. And I've been employing crew in the yacht industry for over 20 years. And as a company, we specialize in doing consultancy work on Social Security for both crew and for owners.
Thank you, John. Hugo?
Hello, I'm Hugo Jacot. I'm the managing director of Wycc Insurance. We cater for the needs of super yacht owners when it comes to insuring their assets as well as the insurance of their crew members.
And Mathieu.
Yeah, I'm Mathieu from Wycc. I'm the director of the company that I've launched in 2006 with the products specifically designed for yacht crew members in terms of medical insurance, repatriation, death, disability, and retirement plan.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. And now let's start with the very basics. John, is the owner going to pay for everything once I start working for him?
Well, I think the first answer is got to be no, but of course you'd like me to expand on that, I guess. I think the interesting thing about Social Security is it's hugely complex scenario. So I think probably the best thing to do is just to cover some of the basics right at the beginning on Social Security, irrespective of the country and the individuals involved. So if we get over some of the basics first, we can then start going into a bit more specifics. And then Hugo and Mathieu, we've already had a chat, but they've got a raft of products and services that they can provide to fill the gaps as well. So Social Security is roughly the same throughout the world. There are different types of terminology which are used from time to time by various countries, but we have employee contributions, and we'll call those primary, and we have employer contributions, and we'll refer to those as secondary contributions. What's really interesting, I suppose, and perhaps a little bit obvious, is that you can't have a secondary contribution unless you have a primary contribution. So there can be no employer's contribution if there's no employee's contribution. And the way in which governments and the government agencies that run Social Security organizations work is to look at the individual and whether or not they can create a liability. So liability is normally assessed on the nationality and or residence of the crew member, where, for example, you might get a crew member that's a national of one country, but is actually living in another country. So both those factors need to be taken into account. But there can, of course, be other factors as well, such as, whether the crew member is married, do they have children, do they have a permanent place of abode somewhere? So there's all these kind of things that need to be considered into the mix. For a lot of crew members, they live in the same country they were born in, even though they may travel abroad for work. So these would generically refer to expatriates. Certain countries have better legislation in place to deal with expatriates than others. And in the EU, we have a particular set of, I was going to say issues, I would rather say regulations, whereby each country has its own social security legislation, but then there's an overarching piece of legislation which comes under the EU articles. So social security in the European Union, and in actual fact, the wider EEA, European Economic Area, which includes Switzerland, for example, um, dates back to 1971. So it's not something that has just popped up overnight. As we know, most modern yachting started probably around the 80s is when it really started to boom. But by then there was already EU articles in place, and that was uh, EU regulation and Article 1408/71. So um, it took them a whole 33 years to update that, and they did that finally with Article 883/2004. And so there wasn't a significant difference there between the two, except that 2004 legislation simplified the original 1971 legislation and made it a lot simpler to understand. And these are written into the EU regulations, and every single EU member state and the EEA member state signs up to the social articles as part of their agreement with the other EU member states. So the EU has created a new level of cross-border social security, and this was later referenced in the Maritime Labour Convention when that was first adopted in 2006 and then was entered into force in 2013. Standard 4.5 of that deals with social security. And we see for the very first time the mention, we often hear about bilateral agreements between countries. So France, for example, would have a bilateral agreement with the UK, irrespective of whether the UK was in the EU or not. And we won't get into what happened as a result of Brexit. It's far too complex at this stage. But as a result of that, in the Maritime Labour Convention, we see the terminology multilateral agreement mentioned for the first time. So this referred specifically really to any country that, or any set of countries that have a binding set of agreements, and the EU is one of those. There aren't many, but the EU is one of them. So that complicates things a little bit more. And then just to sort of add a little bit more to that, social security is also mentioned in Regulation 5.3 of the Maritime Labour Convention as well, which deals with labour supplying countries and the onus on the labour supplying country to put in place a system of social security for seafarers that are resident in its territory. And of course, what we saw only a few years ago was that France issued its own decree on that, which is L111-1, which dealt with foreign seafarers or any seafarer, particularly resident in France and working on a foreign flag vessel. I'm sure that Hugo and Mathieu will talk about that particular product a little bit later, how that can be overcome. So social security is hugely complex, but it is based on the same criteria in most countries, which is nationality of the crew member, residency, whether or not they have a family, a home. It can also include other factors as well. But those are the basics. If we then look at the employer, is the employer going to have a liability? That can also be affected by similar sort of criteria. So the country that's affected will look at where the place of business of the where the owner is, where the place of business of the employer is, where they do they have another place of business other than the main place of business, or where is the payer of wages based if the payer of wages is based somewhere different than where the employer is based. And one of the reasons for that is that, particularly under EU regulations, the entity that pays the wages is regarded as the employer. So you could have a really unusual situation where you have the employer in one jurisdiction and the payer of wages in another. And the wording in that legislation is put there to try and identify who the employer is through the payment of wages mechanism. So these are all the factors that sort of need to be taken into account. But I really think that maybe Hugo and Mathieu should talk about products, because one of the mechanisms within the Maritime Labour Convention is that also contributions can be made to private schemes, and so it's not always accepted by a government that that is the right course of action, but for a lot of governments it is. So perhaps we should introduce them and see what else they can add to this.
Thank you, John, because that is a very good introduction and a nice introduction to the topic. One thing is certain is when you talk about countries that have made the effort to look at the Maritime Labour Convention and add rules or laws that actually try to tie into the MLC. It's certainly very important for a ship owner, a yacht owner, a crew employer to follow those rules and to try to register the crew members as much as possible into the social security regime of the country. So that's very important. And we always, even if we're insurance brokers and our role is to put in place insurance to protect the asset and the crew of owners, we always push owners and their representative, may that be crew employer or manager, to go and look at the social security regime in the country that they evolve in. So that's I guess as an introduction for my side. Private insurance is not always the solution. There might be a state solution, a government solution, or a social security regime. Now, as you mentioned, the rules always include exceptions. There was always laws are written this way. There is a law and there is exceptions. So some of the exception may be that you could register your crew member, register, enroll. I know there are many way of calling it. You could enroll your crew member into a social security regime of another country, an equivalent regime. I think the words are being used often. That is also a solution that should be privileged. And then, only then, comes a private insurance solution, if I may put it this way. And I guess, Kim, if you're happy to show the slide, maybe we'll start talking about what we can find under those solutions that are provided by medical insurance provider. They may be a P&I club with a product that is to cater for the needs of the crew, medical and personal accident, and or full-on crew healthcare product. So until the slides come up, so the first thing we're gonna look at, we're gonna look at this in three aspects, and then certainly Mathieu will add on to that when we come to the retirement aspect. But we'll look first at the medical insurance and what we could find under our private policy. Very good, thank you very much, Kim. So yeah, we'll first look at the medical insurance and what we can find under private medical insurance policy. Then what we can find under personal accident policy and the disability policy. And then we'll also talk about the potential exclusions, which are typical to private insurance, which we are less likely to find in the social security. There are limits, but not exclusions as such. But under the crew healthcare, what you will find is obviously what you're looking at is the medical expenses when you are being taken into the hospital or there is an emergency. That all policies will cover it with certain limits. It could be per year, per crew, a certain area of limitation to those policies. You've got, so like I was saying, the hospitalization and the medical expenses related to that. There'll be a limit on the private insurance policy. Same thing for the repatriation. So it's basically the insurers taking you from the place where you've been found injured or ill and taking you back in your home country. That may be to be hospitalized in your home country, or that may be to be taken home and be off at home. Same thing with the medical evacuation from the ship to shore, so to a local hospital or to an ambulance on shore that will take you take you to the local hospital. Now, as far as this specific cover, which is the medical expenses, you will have a vast array of limits provided by the insurers. You will have the opportunity to have inpatient cover and outpatient cover. So basically, if you are either it's in an emergency or it's a treatment that happens after an illness has been found, and you're going, whether the insurer accepts that you are going to a public hospital or private hospital, whether your insurer has got a list of hospitals they accept, etc. So within what's very important for you to look at, if your owners have provided you with an insurance policy, is to see the limitation of this policy when it comes to medical treatment, and very importantly, what it is that you need to do to gain cover and how this policy will respond. So it would take hours for me to go in details about the many ways those policy responds. So I'm going to keep it very general, but the intention here is to inform you that you should look at those policy and not look at them when you need them, but look at them as when you're employed, and so you are aware of what is available. And don't hesitate to ask your boat, your captain, the manager, the crew employer on how those policy respond, because you will very often see in your ICA, your employment contract, that you are entitled to a policy or to medical insurance. Again, may it be social security regime, may it be privately, and etc. So Kim, if you would look at the next slide, please. Okay. So I was talking about you looking at your policy and looking what it covers. Well, there is many policies that have got optional coverage. Some will have all the options included. You might find policies out there, insurers out there, that will give you the widest possible cover, and some will put a lot of the cover as options. And that's the difference between a policy that might be a bit more competitive price-wise and a policy that might be quite expensive. Usually, it's the side options that are there. A few examples are listed here: dental and optical expenses. That the limits of insurers, I'm sure Matthew won't mind me saying, the limits of insurer are still fairly limited. The limits for dental and optical are not huge. So you really want to make sure that you look at it before you're even thinking of dental and optical treatment, and also how the policy is responding to that, whether they cover a percentage or whether they have a deductible. It's one thing I didn't talk about earlier, is the deductible on the policy. Deductible, sorry if the insurance wording here is a little bit too advanced. The deductible is simply what you pay before your insurer is reimbursing you, or what is deducted from your insurance claim. We want to put it this way too. So routine treatments, some insurers will not want to cover the visit to the doctor, the annual checkup, let's call it this way. Some insurers will not want to cover that. They'll only will want to cover when there is an injury, when there is an illness, and then they come in at a later stage. But if you're just going for a checkup, they might not want to cover that. Some insurers will not cover preventive care. Some, but not that many anymore, used to exclude pregnancy and childbirth. Now we've advanced, we've evolved a lot on that topic, and now this is covered under most policy, but still in there to watch out, because sometimes under private insurance policies it is not covered. So something to watch out here. Crew replacement expenses, most covers have it. However, again, something else to look at, but it's mostly for your crew employer to look at and your manager, rather than from a crew standpoint. Same thing, accommodation costs. It could cover a vast array of costs. It could be the accommodation cost for you to, as a crew member, to recover once you're off, sign off sick, and the boat has moved on and is going to come back. Here, it might be the insured might say, okay, we're not going to repatriate you all the way to Australia, for example, if the boat is in the Med and the boat will be back in a week time. So we'll just pay for your accommodation rather than pay for flights back home and for you to come back again. But it may cover also, in some policy, you have coverage for your next of kin or your close family, one member of your close family, to come and be with you in the country that you are being treated. So some policy go quite far, and obviously, again, we would be speaking for hours if I had added all the possible options. But those are a few examples of nice to have, but also cover that you should check that are there, because they are the one that you might want to see in there. So Kim, if we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Right, so I said we would talk about the medical expenses. Now let's talk about disability benefit and the death benefit as well. So when we, this nice part to talk about, but say you're working on board the vessel and you're injured to the point that you can no longer work, you have a certain level of disability that has been assessed. Your private policy here, a crew policy, could compensate you with an amount, a lump sum that will be paid by the policy when your disability has been assessed. There is a certain process to go through to get that disability payment released. However, note that certain policy do have that. So if you're prevented to work and you have a permanent disability related to your work on board the vessel, then you could look at that policy and claim under that policy. As a side note, that policy may not only cover you for disability that happen on board the vessel. So check the policy. It might be also what has happened just away from the boat, as long as you remain employed by the vessel. Death benefit, I think it's self-explanatory. You'll have benefit written on those policy that covers it. Just be slightly careful, because some death benefits are only related to accident that happen on board, not necessarily death arising out of an illness. Some policy will cover it, some policy won't. Something to check. Then temporary disability is what we could also call sickness wages. That is covered up to, again, if the option's been taken up, it's covered up to a certain amount of weeks. Usually it starts, if that cover is purchased, it starts from 16 weeks. It can go all the way up to 104 weeks on certain policy. Again, that will be clearly laid out on the policy. But it's certainly something that owners, managers, and crew employers are looking at to have the cover also for owners. Not only for the crew members get paid, but also they have those wages reimbursed, so they can hire a replacement crew whilst the usual crew is off sick and then return to the vessel. Retirement, Mathieu will talk about it in a minute, as he's far more knowledgeable than me on that topic, but know that this is available on the private side as well. And Kim, if we could go to the last slide, that's perfect. Thank you very much. So typical exclusion you will find on those policies. It's very important that you're aware of those, because you won't find them in every single policy, but you are likely to find them on the policy that's been put in place. And pre-existing conditions is the only one that you will, that it will depend on the policy that has been put in place for you. But pre-existing conditions, it's not something to be scared of, it's something to be declared. Why I'm insisting on this is, if you don't say anything, and at a later stage it's found that you have already been treated for a certain illness, then you'll have no cover under that policy. However, there's a problem the other way around. You've disclosed that pre-existing condition. Therefore, the insurers have been able to make an assessment on whether they want to cover you or not, or whether they want to cover you, but with an additional premium. It's possible. Every cases are possible, but then it's not something to hide under the carpet. It's something to talk about. Otherwise, you risk at a later stage some huge financial losses, and sadly, it can often fall on the crew member not to have their claim covered. So it's very important that you disclose pre-existing condition. Then the typical exclusion we find are what I call the risky sports / competitions. So for example, I can already think that some of you that are racing on yachts and etc. think, oh no, that doesn't mean I'm not covered. Doesn't mean that. Racing on racing yachts, regattas, etc., that could be covered. But again, look or check with with your boat if you have cover for that. However, racing cars in competition, competitive sports, I'm afraid to say skydiving is often excluded on some policies. So just think about it. You know, we just very quickly, we've had examples before where the boats wanted to do an activity for the crew members, and they called us and they say, "Hey, we're just gonna go skydiving. Are we covered if we get injured whilst we skydive?" And unfortunately, the answer was no, because some policies do exclude it. Self-harm, again, very often excluded from policies, from insurance policies. And the last one, the consequences of drug or alcohol intoxication. Usually you have an exclusion like this in your crew contract. So the exclusion of the insurance policies, it's actually an extension of what you've got in your crew contract, laid out, put together in a different way. However, this is something to be very aware of, because you'll often find this exclusion. So I think I'll let Mathieu talk by now, because I've talked enough.
Can I just say something with Mathieu? When you start, can you just cover also ship owners' liability and the basics of that? Obviously, all ship owners have to offer that, and then what the difference is between that and a medical policy.
Yeah, the ship owner's liability is mainly covered by the P&I club, because the P&I is really the insurance who will provide liability insurance for the ship owners, whatever the event linked to the ship owners. And a part of these events could be or should be claims with medical claims or repatriation or whatever to the crew member. This is in that case that the P&I club will provide ship owners liability insurance as defined by the MLC. We need to make a difference between ship owners liability insurance for the P&I club and social security, because under the MLC you have a distinction between ship owners liability and social security. Ship owners liability, that's really this is with this part that we will have all linked to job activity. If you have a medical trouble, if you have sick due to a problem during on-duty period, in that case, you will be covered, or you should be covered under the ship owner's liability. In fact, most of P&I club will ask now to provide this kind of benefits through a private scheme. That means that on the market, you will have travel insurance who can provide this type of event linked to the job activity, or product as we provide really private scheme. And the difference between travel insurance and private scheme, in that case, that we will really provide benefits during private and professional life. But ship owners liability is really linked, or should be linked, to the P&I. The other benefits, social security, is really social security through a state social security system or through a private scheme. And social security is not only applicable to commercial yachts, but also to private yachts, and not only also during an official launch. That means if the yacht is at a shipyard, this is a new project, a refit or etc. In that case, this is really the social security part of private scheme that can be involved of this type of benefits for the crew member or the family. In that case, the crew member can be considered as a shore-based personnel. And
just to add to that, Matt, you're absolutely right, of course. And if there's somebody attending a new build for a prolonged period of time, then they could fall within the social security system of the country where the build is taking place. And the same for a refit that's taken a long time as well. They could end up paying social security in the country in which that refit is taking place.
Yeah, and in that case, the plan should be also, if you are talking about refit, new construction, etc. This is mainly VIP employees who will follow the new construction, etc. That will be senior officers, mainly in that case. And in order to attract and retain the crew member, in that case. That should be also an employee benefit strategy to provide a real plan. The plan could be in addition to a social security system. Yes, of course, as a secondary plan, but should be as a primary plan if the crew have no access to social security system. And in that case, for this type of crew, that's really interesting to provide solution for dental treatment, vision care, as explained by Hugo just before, or also for family members, or why not for retirement plan. That's another approach. It's really hard to talk about that in yachting industry at the beginning, because in yachting industry it was zero tax, zero for everything. Now we are talking about additional cost to the employer, to the yacht manager. It's totally crazy compared to 15 years ago or 20 years ago. Now we are talking really about a strategy and how to be safe, to be secure, to have no problem if you provide a comprehensive package, and if we are able to manage to handle the costs. And yes, now we will talk about employee contributions, look like a social security system, traditional social security system for shore workers, or additional plan for family, additional plan for retirement, and the crew can pay for a part, contribute for a part. This is totally different compared to the market before, and this is in that case that the crew needs to be aware that he needs to pay for something. This is not the employer or the ship owners who will pay for everything. In that case, the crew can contribute for a part, and when the crew will contribute for a part, that should be also interesting for the crew members, because it can make tax profit if you pay tax. You have a lot of things to take in consideration, but at this time, it's not the matters of the tax, but the idea is that all social security branches, 8 at this time with the WYCC, we are able to provide 8 social security branches under private scheme. Just unemployment benefits, we are not able to do that. But retirement plan, for example, is a strategy more and more that we have in our portfolio, that the crew, not only because they need to be compliant with a specific legislation, for example, French legislation, but also really as a strategy to attract and retain the crew. The employer will contribute for a part for the retirement plan. Now the crew had a saving account open and can contribute again with a new employer, or can contribute also with the current employer. That will be employer-employee contribution in order to save money for the future. It's really that, because other crew members have no access, for most of them, to social security system, or when they have access to social security system, they need to have more benefits, because the contribution are very low, and in fact at the retirement age they will receive approximately nothing. In that case, they need to contribute for that, to plan for the future. Of course, we can have real estate, etc., a lot of type of investment, but with the strategies through the employer, the ship owners, etc., now on the market we are able to provide additional plan for the crew member, and they can contribute or not, but through the employer, to a retirement plan, and that will follow the crew at every step of their life. That's really the idea. Okay.
Yeah, and it is important, isn't it, guys, for crew to have their own travel insurance. You know, they're only covered when they're employed. So if somebody loses their employment for whatever reason, whether they resign, whether they have their contract terminated, there's going to be a period where they might not be employed at all. And if they get ill or injured in that period between jobs, they're going to be snookered if they don't have anything in place. So I think that, you know, our message certainly as an employer is that all crews should look at what they can do themselves to try and help ease the situation in the event that they're ill or injured. And the only way they can do that is really to take out, at the very least, travel insurance and possibly their own healthcare as well.
That's the biggest issue, I think, in the market. That's also the reason why a state social security system should be interesting. At this time, for example, with our plan, this is mainly, to be honest, we have approximately 95 or 97% of our subscription are through the employer. And for the other percentage, we have individual subscription. But of course, when we have negotiated our plan, as this is a private scheme, mainly under group subscription, but a private scheme, we have a bridge who allows to continue the plan on an individual basis, because that should be really interesting if the crew load the job, whatever the reason. But also, why a private scheme? Because when the crew is still on the payroll, you have rotational crew member or the crew during holidays or etc. For us, it was really important to keep the crew insured for that during this type of period, rotation or holidays. And and the next step is really the crew leave the boat, whatever the reason, he can continue and contribute on an individual basis or through a new employer. Okay, but that's really an important matter to check for a crew. Of course, if the crew just travel and just need a travel insurance, but they need to be aware that travel insurance is only for travel. It's not for the whole life. It's not for routine treatment. Is for a travel insurance is for travel in a foreign country. It's not in your home country. That's really the basis of a travel insurance. That means no dental treatment, no vision care, no routine treatment, no medical exam with your general practitioner or specialist, local specialist, etc. It's totally different compared to a private scheme.
I guess I would add that technically a crew member that is on their way to the ship is covered somehow by their owner. Their owners does have a liability to get them to the ship. And so whether they are leaving their home to go to the ship or returning from the ship, the owners have a liability to look after them. So
well, that's right. A contract commences when the crew member commences when they commence their journey to join the vessel, and similarly, it ends. The insurance ends when they arrive home, when they've been repatriated at the end of the contract. So it is important for crew.
Net. Yeah,
Not absolutely.
But it's a safety net.
Yeah.
I think my opinion, probably because I provide only crew insurance, but I think the best way for me in order to manage social security system is through the employer, because when you work ashore, this is really the employer who organizes contribution to social security system. Employer or employee contribution, he manage everything. And now we have that in the offshore industry also. If you work in the oil and gas industry, of course, at the beginning, it was exactly the same that in yachting or shipping industry, they pay a salary, gross salary, equal net salary, and that's it. But in fact, more and more in oil and gas industry, they provide private scheme for the employees with employee contributions for a part, because if the employee would like contribute for the family or would like contribute for retirement, yes, the employee will contribute for something. But it's really a tool in that case. And for me, in yachting industry, this is really the employer has defined by the MLC also. The employer have the liability to check that you have a social security system in place. In that case, that should be really better if this is the employer who organize the contributions to a social security system. Whatever, that should be a state, private scheme or both, no problem. But if the employer manage that directly, that should be better. And the crew, again, needs to be aware that he needs to contribute for something.
Yeah, I think there is this view that the owner is going to pay for everything, but that's not the case. And we know, certainly in a number of countries, both inside the EU and outside, where there needs to be a distinction between the employee and the employer contribution.
Exactly. Thank you, everyone. Very, very interesting. And we have a few minutes for questions. Our question very often is there a difference between a private and a commercial yacht?
In yachting terms, yes, but in terms of social security, no, absolutely not. The only difference is that MLC, which deals with commercial vessels, has it written into their own into the convention itself. But all crew members, whether they work on a private or commercial yacht, are subject to social security legislation.
Excellent. Thank you, John. And someone asked what happens with freelancers. So there are a lot of crew who are freelancing now. Are they covered? Do they need to be covered, or do they need to get, a private insurance?
Well, okay, before Hugo and Mathieu step in on this, what I just want to clarify is whoever is employing them needs to identify, are they a seafarer or are they not? So the International Labour Organization issued both categories and criteria on this to try and help people identify. It's not a definitive method, but it gives you ideas about whether or not that person is a crew member. The way that we describe it normally is if the individual is performing any seafarer duties at all, then they will be regarded as a seafarer. Therefore, they will need to have a seafarer's employment agreement. So they won't be a contractor. And MLC in particular introduced the concept because in the old days, the masters of the vessels were considered to be the representatives of the owners. Even masters now, since MLC certainly, and way before then, they're all regarded as employees. So they're all, for social security purposes, they're all treated the same. Over to you guys.
John, that was very useful clarification, because I was going to use the word contractors. So I'm glad you defined it in a way. So yeah, to follow up on that, very simply, if they are seafarers, like John described it, then there is no issue. They should be added to the boat crew medical policy or the social security for the crew under the social security. That's very clear. Now, when they are freelancers or contractors, this is very different, because then they are no longer part of the crew. Then they need to carry their own insurance. But now you're going a little further. That's why I'm taking on that question, because we're going more than the crew medical insurance here. We're going on to liability, their own liability insurance as I'm going to call it service provider, if I may. But so there is two types of insurance that now they need, is their own medical insurance and personal accident and disability, like I mentioned earlier, and also the insurance for their business. Even if you are a freelancer and you don't have a big business as such, you still need to be insured for the actions that you carry out, whether you are a masseuse on board, or whether you are a security personnel on board, or whether there's all sorts of professions that come on board vessels and that tend to be on board vessels that are not listed as crew members. And again, maybe there is a bit of a blur line. I think that's what John was saying. There is a bit of a blur line on when do you become a crew, when are you a contractor or freelancer, and that gray area need to be clarified with the vessel. And we do have those conversations very often. When it's set out that the person is not a crew, then it puts the burden back on them to find their own insurance. It's not as clear cut as that, to be honest, but sometimes we can find some insurance for them. But it goes, is often the decider.
I can, if people email me, I can provide either a link to or information about the categories and criteria issued by the ILO. It should help people come to some decision. But as I said, it's not definitive, and it does say that in the 94th session wording of the ILO's document.
Thank you very much, everyone. Mathieu, anything to add?
No, I think that's all.
Perfect.
No more.
So in our discussions, we also mentioned that, you have examples of crew who have experienced long-term injuries. And I was wondering if any of you wanted to mention maybe an example, so that the people who are watching us today understand the importance, and the difference between how impactful is the social security and the private insurance as well.
Yeah, I can share a lot of example, but
Let's do one.
yeah, so only one. For example, during the weekend, you make a round trip with your motorbicycle, and you have an accident. And what's happened next if you have no real private scheme, etc. The crew is declare, permanent disabled, cannot work anymore on board. No liability, it's really claims himself on the road. And we need to pay for medical insurance, we need to pay for salary compensation, sickness benefits, and long-term disability. In that case, a private scheme can have two options. In most of cases, that should be a lump sum. I have one example: the crew receives three times annual salary. The salary was approximately 10,000 euro per month. Of course, that's never enough, to be honest, but it's better than nothing. If the crew was hired or covered by a travel insurance or just only a P&I, in that case, in most of cases, the event is not linked to the job activity, the benefits in that case will be nothing. That's really just one example. That should be an event, just an accident on the road, or that can be a cancer, or that can be a long-term illness. In that case, that's really necessary to have this kind of benefits. And just not only after an accident, the crew needs to be aware that an illness that should happen also.
Thank you, Mathieu. Now let's look at some of the questions we've received. There's some interesting ones from Lauren Van Wycc, for instance. Is there an age limit for crew coverage under current schemes policies?
It depends on which plan.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say. There is often age limits. I can see that the question is also, okay, sorry, I'm paraphrasing, but how do we go around this? It's certainly you'll have to show that the crew is fit for duty, and then each insurers will look at it differently. Some will just say, okay, the crew's fit for duty, it's okay. But then some will say, okay, we need another examination from an independent doctor to decide whether we will cover that crew. And some will say, no, we cannot. We'll just won't do it. So it depends on the insurer, like Mathieu said, but there's many ways of looking at it.
Just for example, in most of cases, this is 65. For example, at WYCC for medical insurance, at this time, we have no real age limit. If the crew has a seafarer's visit, NG1, etc., in that case, no exclusion for medical insurance, repatriation. But we have a limitation regarding death, disability, and sick wages. This is 100% of the benefits up to 70 years old. But after, we will decrease the benefit, and the maximum age is 75.
Thank you very much. Further to that, she also asks liabilities for repatriation to non-listed countries. What liabilities, if any, arise if a crew member requests repatriation to a country that is not listed on this SEEA, the Seafarer Employment Agreement? And how should such requests be managed? And what steps can you ensure to have compliance with regulations and policies?
I think there are a couple of issues on this. Firstly, a crew member should have at the beginning, before they commence employment, should state where their place of repatriation. And within the wording of not just MLC, but other flag state regulations, it normally says that the place of repatriation should be the place where they have the most significant connection, which is usually their home. And a lot of crew will say, well, I don't live anywhere. Okay, but where did you used to live? Yeah, so it's not difficult for somebody like us as an employer to work out where somebody's place of repatriation should be. but quite often a crew member will ask to be repatriated somewhere else. Our first question is why. We want to know why. If we are going to put something different on the contract other than the place where they have the most significant connection, we want to know there is some kind of connection there in the first instance. If they then get to the end of the contract and they decide that they want to go somewhere else, our first question again is why. We have no obligation to actually repatriate them to somewhere different. It might be beneficial to both parties, though, for that to happen, in which case, then a declaration should be signed to that effect. As for the knock-on effect of insurance, I'll let the guys speak about that.
Yeah, I think I'd like to mention something about it. That has happened before, that a crew member has requested to be repatriated in a different country than the country on the SCA. Well, then start exactly what John said. Then the question why is asked, and then if the question is because I want to go on holiday in that place, then we have to be a little careful when it comes to insurance, because we mentioned earlier that the owner's liable until repatriated home. Well, if there is a detour in the way going home, like a week holiday in a certain country, that is difficult. That is negotiation that needs to be had with insurers, both actually the crew insurer and especially if the crew is being terminated at the end of it, both with the crew insurers and also the P&I insurer, because we just need to be clear as to what if something happens to the crew member during that time where they're on holiday, no longer working for the vessel, and then they do their last leg home. So it is not the simplest request to manage if an owner's and manager or crew employer is risk averse, because it creates a lot of blur lines that need to be addressed ahead, or certainly our view, and needs to be addressed ahead rather than when an incident arises. So because the answer to that is to be avoided if possible, because it is not an easy thing to manage for all parties.
Thank you. We have another question from Pepe asking if the master of the yacht needs a liability insurance.
Can I tackle that one? Because that's my favorite topic. Right, there is that fear mongering in the industry that when a captain can be liable when they're professionally hired on board a vessel that has got appropriate insurance. By appropriate insurance, I mean hull and machinery, P&I, so liability that includes employer's liability to some extent, and crew insurance. Now, if they have insurance, liability insurance, and it's declared that there is crew members on board, the captain liability is insured because the captain is employed in the same way that the crew is employed by the owner or crew employer that will be named on the policy. Therefore, the captain's liability for his action or her action as a seafarer, albeit being the captain, is covered under the P&I policy. And I guess this only comes in, that request only comes in because there has been some policy put in place out there which don't cover the liability of the crew member. And I guess that's the issue that comes in. So I guess to all captains that are asking you, where you're asking yourself that question, request the liability policy of your owners and check that liabilities to and of the crew are covered, because you would be included in that.
Excellent, thank you. Now, Giulio is asking for an idea of rates for different countries to enroll crew on social security schemes, which also makes me think of a very common question that we receive, such as crew who are resident in France, can they pay their social security contributions into Malta, which apparently is more convenient? Can anyone tackle this?
Where do we start? Well, first of all, to answer the question as it's written, they vary hugely. So Malta, as you mentioned, has a flat rate. So I think it's just over 50 euros per person per week, and that would be for the employer and the employee. The UK has a percentage system. It's, for argument's sake, it's around 11%. France has a different system again. The combined employer-employees about 50%. So each country is slightly different. To answer the question about Malta, Malta's part of the EU and therefore falls under the EU regulations in the same way France does. France enacted, as Mathieu and I were working on it at the time, what seems like many years ago now, the new French Social Security decree that was issued, L111-1. And within that, France amended that decree to allow contributions to private schemes. However, within that, there is the bilateral and the multilateral wording. So if you're working on a Malta flagged boat and you are a Malta national or a Malta resident or somebody from a country with which Malta has a bilateral agreement on social security, then you can pay your social security contributions to Malta. In fact, it is written into their regulations that you should do. If not, then Mathieu has a solution.
Yeah,
Do you like the way I set that up?
That's really the best answer to that is that you need to have a link to Malta in order to be able to pay social security system in Malta. And the link is made through nationality, residence, flag or employer. If not, of course, you cannot contribute to Malta. But the crew needs to be aware that as this is a flat fee, the benefits are also based on this type of approach. That means that, of course, you have an access to social security system, a European social security system. But in fact, at the end, if you have medical treatment, etc., yes, you will have European card, or you will have agreement with your carte vitale in France, etc. No problem. But if you would like to have a retirement, or if you would like to receive sickness benefits, we have no miracle for that. You need to have a private scheme.
Yeah.
Very clear. Thank you very much. I want to thank everyone for participating today and for all the information that our speakers have provided, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.